Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 20th, 9 o'clock, 9:01 to be precise, and some 40-something seconds, too, in case you're keeping track. Time for us to start today's show. Do you think Skype will come along for the ride? It's a big question mark. Something's going on, and I guess I'll have to search around to see whether I have the latest Skype updates or not. Or maybe I do have the latest Skype updates, and that's the problem. All of a sudden, last couple of days, and a little bit of last week, too, Skype just started crashing sort of randomly. You know, these things happen. But now it's in the habit of crashing 4 or 5 times right up to about 1 minute before airtime and then just catching on. And I thought it might have something to do with the way I was responding to the crashes, too. Oh, I'm sending my reports to Apple. I don't know what Apple's doing with them. They don't, they never say, hey, I got your report and we fixed that problem. Of course, they don't have the personnel to deal with that on a personal level. Who does? But I don't know. But it's getting worse and worse, and it's coming closer, or it continues until closer and closer to airtime, and it's a little scary because if we don't have Skype working, we can't talk to Greg. We can't talk to anybody, for that matter. And today we're supposed to talk to Ian Reifowitz, and we screwed him over on Tuesday as it is. So, all right, fingers crossed. Skype hasn't crapped out on us during the show, except for the big crash on Tuesday, where I think it was taken out by Firefox in that case, in a chain reaction explosion. But, all right, well, fingers crossed once again. Here we go. We got another show to do and plenty to talk about from Greg, plenty to review with Ian, plenty to discuss from the news headlines today. Not a news flash, but what's being discussed on Twitter this morning. Well, one, continued repeal the 14th Amendment activism, which is, of course, ironic and silly in that it is being driven by constitutional conservatives who want nothing more than to love the Constitution as written, except where it pisses them off. I will say, though, we should continue this pushback. It's a great idea to push back on them and force them to say, yeah, I don't actually love the entirety of the Constitution. There are some major problems with it. And, hey, maybe you can force a trade and say, hey, if we're going to say that the original intent of the framers ought to be examined and not the words they left behind, I will allow that discussion on the 14th Amendment if you'll just allow that on, I don't know, the Second Amendment. Of course, that'll scare the crap out of them, and they'll insist that there's material reasons why one is BS and the other one is awesome. But we have come to expect that. We understand that. And it's probably not a good idea to enter into a bargain to trade gigantic chunks of the Constitution one for another. You're probably better off leaving it right where it is. But I suppose if the door's open and we got to talk about redoing some of our amendments, then number 2 has to be on the table as well. I would guess. I imagine that you'll find lots of support for that one. You'll find lots of opposition and anger and all sorts of reactions to it. But, is that not happening on the 14th Amendment? I don't think so. Let's see the other discussion this morning. Weird one, but not unpredictable. Tracing its roots back to Matthew Continetti, editor of the Washington Free Beacon, which is a horrible publication. No doubt they think the same thing of Daily Kos, but we're right and they're wrong. Also a contributing editor to the Weekly Standard, which is a somewhat less disgusting publication. Free Beacon is just horrible. And in the class, I would say, with the Daily Caller and Drudge and what's the one that Michelle Malkin did that is just about making people angry at stuff and tweeting angry? I can't remember the name of that one. But it's right up there in terms of just pure crap. WorldNet Daily, or whatever the heck that one is. Alex Jones and his. I would put them in the same class there. Anyway, he's upset because there's a prominent Black Lives Matter activist I'm not sure who it is. And, featured here in a political story, who is giving an interview on racial justice, gasp, from Martha's Vineyard. And he's very appropriately admonished by a few of our Twitter friends, including, Oliver Willis jumped in there to point out, by the way, if you're pulled over by the police and you're black, they don't really care where your summer home is. And Greg Green as well, who said, by the way, and I saw Atrios point this out a few minutes later, same thing, didn't point to the same source, but made the same point, that there's a very long association with, admittedly, black elite culture, but black culture, no doubt, and Martha's Vineyard. And you know what? I would ask a local. I'd be curious to know how that came about, because it wasn't a matter of, I don't think, hey, let's pretend to be white. I have a feeling that it was sort of like, well, we have some money and we'd like to have a nice summer home, and there are some places that are and some places that are not entirely available to us. And then, like, later on, the rest of white America found out, hey, that's a pretty nice looking place. Maybe we should grab it for ourselves too. And we won't actually kick those other folks out of here. We'll let them exist, and then everyone will forget all about that. Anyway, so, yes, Bill in Portland, Maine reminds me that Malkin's thing is Twitchy. That's right. I forgot about the name of that one. I don't know. I blocked that out a long time ago, I think. But thanks very much for reminding me. Speaking of Bill in Portland, Maine, he has a morning tweet for us. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We have been for about 7 minutes or so. Fantastic record we've established here. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, one-ups Trump and calls for abolishing all the amendments. I say so. Let's get rid of them. I mean, honestly, aren't amendments just admissions that there were mistakes in the original? The Constitution is perfect as far as I'm concerned, and we ought not to have any amendments to it. Why admit mistakes? I can't think of a good reason. I don't know. Anyway, the only way to one-up Trump, by the way, yesterday's developments in the ongoing contest to be meaner than the next candidate to immigrants. I don't know who came first, but I did see that Ben Carson says, I'm open to it. He's open to it. He's not saying yes to it. I'm open to using armed drone strikes domestically to stop immigration, illegal immigration at the border. I assume this means launching, what do they have? Hellfire missiles on those things? I was going to say Sidewinder, but I think those are on the planes. The Hellfire missiles that the drones have. Someone can correct me. Someone can look it up. My production assistant, and you can my crowdsourced production assistants can send that to the KITM hashtag and let me know. But I guess he's talking about blowing people up in the desert, and I assume just the desert. I assume once they get to a populated area, you would stop launching missiles from the sky. But this is, of course, a very pro-life position adopted by Dr. Carson here, and that's why, I don't know, I thought it might help them think about it if we referred to it rather than as drone strikes, as sky abortions, but I don't know that we're really going to be able to get them to think about these things consistently. Speaking of birthright citizenship, though, I've got a very interesting piece that I could share with you later on, and I'll scroll back while I'm talking to Greg so I can give credit for it properly. I said it was surprising yesterday to find constitutional conservatives and strict textualists, I guess, somehow expressing bafflement at what to do with the very, very plain language of the 14th Amendment and suddenly being into legislative intent. But I got some great background information that argues very well that legislative intent was pretty clear there, too. They knew very well that the naturalization of slaves was a one-time thing. I mean, that was pretty obvious at the time. We were no longer importing slaves. We're going to naturalize former slaves, and then, apparently, it's the view of these conservatives today that the framers of the 14th Amendment had no idea that anyone else would ever come to the country and be born here. Clearly not the case, but it's put much more eloquently by better legal minds than mine. I found one. He's awesome. Anyway, here's Greg Dworkin. A better medical mind than mine, certainly, and probably Ben Carson's, too, because I don't think you're in favor of drone anything, in terms of it's weird. They always talk about surgical strikes with drones, and maybe surgeons.
Well, that's by
think
Carson. That's where Carson comes in. Actually, he is a very good surgeon. Don't take that away from him. He's a terrific neurosurgeon, pediatric neurosurgeon at that.
He's a terrific
if he had
surgeon.
just stuck to that and stayed away from God stuff and then running for office, he'd have just an outstanding personal story to tell.
Yes. Well, a good medical mind is agile and adaptable in across many disciplines, including knowing when to stop. I think. That's my personal opinion, but I could be entirely wrong. A lot of doctors think they're God.
Look, the best, but the nurses set them straight. The best surgeon is the one who knows when not to operate. That's absolutely correct.
All right. Well, there you have it. There's a do no harm thing in there somewhere, too.
Which most of us ascribe to. There's a lot of...
Uh-oh. Now I've lost your audio without indication of our crash here.
Oh?
Oh, there you are. Okay. It's just going to be intermittent.
I just hope Armando's able to stop by, because there's a lot of amendment stuff here. It isn't just the 14th. It's also the 5th.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Right. Okay. How did we get to the 5th today, though?
Well, it's a question of applying, things to the federal government versus the states.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And, if you step back and look at the larger picture, the question always is this country's rights protected as much as you think they are?
No. But okay.
Right.
So
if the courts say that the Fifth Amendment doesn't have an explicit equal protection clause,
yes,
and that it doesn't apply to the federal government, or that it doesn't apply to the states, depending upon which way you interpret it, that, where does the District of Columbia fall in? And when can it be taken away? When is it implicit in the Constitution, and when is it just some dude's interpretation that can change at any moment?
Yeah. Well, it does pose a big problem. The Fifth Amendment, as far as due process, of course, stood there for a long time and applied to the federal government. And I guess when there was a question about whether it applied to the states or not, that was finally clarified by the 14th Amendment. But since then, there's been an awful lot of Supreme Court jurisprudence that has applied federal government restrictions to the states, incorporated the amendments, the rest of the Bill of Rights, against the states by reference to the 14th Amendment. Repealing the 14th Amendment is no joke. I mean, it's like pulling out the bottom piece on a Jenga tower. It doesn't just say, well, that's going to fix immigration. But of course, Trump would never stand for that explanation.
Right.
I'm too busy for that.
It would remove equal protection to a whole lot of people who otherwise rely on the 14th Amendment to interpret the Fifth.
Everybody there is. There's nothing. There's no racial or class distinction. Equal protection is equal. Everybody gets it in the face from that. But, yes, okay.
So, but and this is, I'm trying to understand this because I am not a lawyer. But if the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause only applies to states and not the federal government, then that means that there's nothing in the Constitution that says that the federal government can't pass discrimination laws.
Well, there we have the Fifth Amendment.
But, so that's, okay, so if the Fifth Amendment is interpreted as carrying the same protections in federal law that the 14th carries in state law, then, maybe there's some protection. But then again, if it's all a matter of how you interpret it, then you don't even need to pass a constitutional amendment to do away with this birthright thing. Just pass a law and interpret it properly.
Well, I guess if you can get 5 justices to say, I know that it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even make any sense to me, but I am voting this way, then the job's done. It doesn't matter that nobody's going to have anything to go on afterwards.
Right. Now, understand, I'm not saying that it all goes away just because, let's say, Trump gets elected. What I'm saying is that just like you thought that the Second Amendment was pretty clear about whether or not you could apply gun control laws to cities or areas. It was pretty clear, except until the Supreme Court said, no, it's not.
Right. For 200 years, it was very clear, and then... Yeah,
but the same thing could happen with this. I'm just saying that the fragility of what we consider to be inalienable rights really is, dependent upon a whole lot of interpretation, which is why I always make the point that you could talk about, this issue or that issue as much as you want to. To me, the single most important reason why you vote for one person over the other as president is who you're going to appoint to the Supreme Court, because you know what? It really matters. And
yes.
Why it?
Well, that's always true and always a good consideration.
In any case, I was looking up this stuff because Donald Trump brings this up and says maybe we should just end birthright citizenship. Here's a story from CBS News. Is it even possible? And the funny thing is, when Trump put out his position paper on it, he referred to polling, which basically says the American public agrees with him.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's check the polling.
And they might. I don't know. Let's see.
They might. So, actually, there's a CBS poll. Should this automatic citizenship be changed? Kept as is 49% and changed 47%. This is from August 2010. And there happens to be a Rasmussen poll from the same era, April 2011, which says 61% oppose U.S. citizenship for children born to illegal immigrants.
Okay.
So there is some sentiment about that. Just as there's always some sentiment about removing any given one of the amendments to the Constitution. None of them have like 100%, support from the American people. Some are more popular than others. The First Amendment happens to be fairly popular. The last poll I saw said only 34% said it went too far when it came to free speech.
Aha.
Right. 34% felt it went too far.
That's still too high. But okay.
To me, that's still too high.
Love the Constitution.
But one of the interesting things I found when I was looking up this stuff about what is Trump talking about is a reference in the August 2010 poll story from CBS. I didn't realize this. I was uninformed, but now I am. This is from 2010. Let me read this to you. And this is going to support another discussion we were having the other day. Senator Lindsey Graham has said he may introduce a constitutional amendment to change the 14th Amendment. This is 2010.
Yeah.
While other Republican leaders have advocated for congressional hearings on the issue of birthright citizenship, the Obama administration has blasted Republicans for considering a change to the Constitution in lieu of considering Democrats' plans for comprehensive immigration reform. The debate was pushed to the forefront of national politics after Arizona passed a controversial state law requiring law enforcement to check a person's immigration status in certain situations and requiring immigrants carry their identification papers in public. And you all may remember there was actually a kind of a boycott of Arizona at the time.
Yeah. Well, something happened with that too. All right.
But, part of the deal there is that Lindsey Graham is no Johnny-come-lately. He was there before Trump was. And that gets back to the argument of, is Trump really changing the debate for the Republican Party, or is he simply bringing out to the public for everybody to see what they've always been talking about anyway? I was convinced by David Bernstein, a Massachusetts reporter who was arguing this fairly forcefully and I think credibly on Twitter, by pointing out examples of where this was mainstream Republican thinking way before Trump ever opened his mouth. Trump's no idiot in that regard. He's tapping into something that, is very popular among Republicans. And as he says, in a certain extent, depending upon how you word the question, for the American people as a whole.
Yeah. And I mean, it may not be even a matter of his being a genius and ferreting it out as much as it is, immigration upsets me. And I either will Google some stuff about what to do about this, or some of my advisors will Google some stuff, and they'll find the paper trail that Republicans have laid for quite a while about birthright citizenship and what would it take materially to get rid of it. And he read it and said, let's do this thing. And he probably thought he was treading onto less than controversial grounds, actually, which is a remarkable thing for him to want to do.
Right, but it turns out that that's in fact the case. So, it's just important to put in perspective that this, sometimes you look at this and say, this is ridiculous. How can this go anywhere? But then again, we thought that about the Obamacare lawsuit.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is, there are people who really believe that this is an important issue and that they're on the right side of it, and it does go forward. Yes. And you scratch your head and say, how could that be? But look, I mean, the laws that protect people and give them rights are a whole lot more fragile than you otherwise might think. That's my theme for today. I
am in agreement there. I'll also add just this one note, and without diving into the heart of the story. There was circulated yesterday a good point from Des Moines Dem over at Bleeding Heartland, who circulated his piece on Twitter, saying Steve King's big mouth finally cost him something. That was the headline. The idea being, back in 2011, when Steve King, notorious anti-immigration,
right, cantaloupes for
right,
calf muscles, right?
When he endorsed ending birthright citizenship, the Republicans at the time, and this is a year after Lindsey Graham does it, apparently, he was considered so toxic among House Republicans looking to establish their leadership of their new majority there in the House that they bypassed him for a subcommittee chairmanship. They did not want somebody who would endorse such a thing as a subcommittee chair on the House Judiciary Committee, and instead went with Elton Gallegly from California on that. And then now, of course, it's not only mainstream, but over half the Republican field for president endorses not only the end of birthright citizenship, but actually goes straight at the 14th Amendment itself on that. Interesting.
So it is, and again, it's that's a very good point in terms of emphasizing the fact that this happens to be mainstream Republicanism, and therefore it's not fair, or unfair, I should say, on our part. It's not fair to look at Donald Trump and say it's all Trump, and it's not unfair on our part to say this represents the Republican Party, and Trump, Trump isn't a conservative. Trump is a special case. Trump is this. Trump is that. Trump is representing the mainstream of Republican Party thinking, which is, by the way, why at the current time he leads Republican polling.
Yeah.
Now, Mark Blumenthal makes the great point that, listen, even if he stays at 25 or 30, that's not a majority. And his biggest hurdle is math. 30% doesn't win when you're running against one person. It does when you're running against 16. So unless he can grow that support, and I don't take the new Quinnipiac polls as evidence of that in the sense that this is stuff that's already happened. Trump's already shot up to the top. Trump has already, consolidated that 30%. Question is, can he get to 40? Can he get to 50? So far, not much evidence of that. And I think ultimately a lot of the stuff that he's talking about will be toxic, but there's going to be a price to pay because, just as the Obamacare lawsuit eventually failed, it's highly unfortunate that the whole process, and process is what it is, you got to go with it. But it's unfortunate that the whole process legitimized the idiot slight point that somehow made it, no, this is real, and you guys can't dismiss this because we're right. Look, the Supreme Court took it up. They didn't just dismiss it. When things like that happen, you go, what is wrong with this country? Why wasn't that thing just thrown out, in the first place?
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, when you get to be president, you get to be really conservative, and you can appoint conservative people all over the federal judiciary system. You're going to get results like this eventually, and that's the long-term plan. And people really have to start thinking about this long-term and not just, okay, well, I like this person and they're good to have a beer with.
Yeah, because that's not actually, how these things are done. Beer.
And they don't want to have a beer with you. Let me just tell you that right now.
Yeah. That's true. Right. That's actually a better question then. Rather than which candidate would you rather have a beer with, which candidate do you think would really be more disgusted by having to have a beer with you and then vote for the other one?
Right. And that's never the question that's asked. One last thing here in a similar theme that I want to bring up. And again, I need your and Armando's opinion on this because I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on the radio. It just bothers me when that which we assume to be rights turns out to be maybe just fragile somebody's opinion. And this is a story from the LA Times. House lawsuit against Obama is turning into a real problem for the president. And this one, you may recall, is the House suing Obama over whether or not parts of Obamacare were allocating money in ways which is really the House's prerogative. And therefore, it's a suit to reestablish that there should be separation of powers, and the House has rights that the executive shouldn't otherwise, try to take for itself. And the issue there is, does the House really have standing to sue? And if they do, does that open it up to every single thing that the president ever does where the House decides they're going to sue him over it? And again, not being a lawyer, that to me is like one of the most horrible things that could ever happen in the United States, and yet it's not so far-fetched.
Yeah, I got to look at this one too, because I don't know. On the surface, it doesn't make even a great deal of sense to me that they would be suing President Obama over this. If the issue is where the bill originated, their problem is with both themselves for not stopping it at the time and blue slipping the thing, and with the Senate for passing them something that didn't originate in the House. Why sue President Obama? He's just executing what the paper says.
So here's the quick summary, which is right up here at the beginning. An unprecedented House lawsuit against President Obama that was once derided as a certain loser looks stronger now and may soon deliver an early legal round to Republican lawmakers complaining of executive branch overreach. A federal judge is expected to decide shortly whether to dismiss the suit, but thanks to an amended complaint in a recent Supreme Court ruling, the Republican-backed case has a much better chance of proceeding, attorneys agree. You see that Supreme Court ruling? You see what I'm saying here about who you appoint?
What ruling?
At issue is whether the House may sue in court to defend its constitutionally granted power of the purse if the president spends money that was not appropriated by Congress. The lawsuit alleges that Obama's top aides quietly claimed the power to spend $178 billion over the next decade to reimburse health insurance for covering the cost of co-payments for low-income people who buy subsidized insurance under the Affordable Care Act. The administration initially submitted a request for an annual appropriation, about $4 billion, but then changed course. Officials, including Secretary Burwell, decided the so-called cost-sharing payments to insurers were mandatory and were akin to an entitlement written into law, so there was no need to seek additional approval from Congress. House Republicans disagree, and they say the administration's spending is unconstitutional.
Okay.
This is a Jonathan Turley-led lawsuit. In May, U.S. District Judge Rosemary Collyer voiced exasperation when a Justice Department lawyer tried to explain why the Obama administration was entitled to spend the money without the approval of Congress. Why is this not an insult to the Constitution, Collyer asked. But the more formidable barrier now facing the lawsuit is a procedural rule. Judges have repeatedly said lawmakers do not have standing to refight political battles in court.
Okay.
And an off-cited ruling, the Supreme Court in 1997 tossed out a lawsuit by 6 members of Congress who contended the newly passed Line-Item Veto Act was unconstitutional. Justices said the lawmakers were not sufficiently harmed by the law to merit bringing a lawsuit. But in late June, the High Court gave the House lawsuit an apparent boost when it ruled the Arizona legislature had standing to sue in federal court to defend its power to draw election districts. The Arizona lawmakers lost the case, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said the legislator could sue because it was an institutional plaintiff asserting an institutional injury. And that's what the House Republicans now claim in their suit.
Interesting. I'd have to distinguish as between state legislatures versus the federal government and branches of the federal government versus themselves, not to mention one house against the other. But okay.
Right, but here's where words matter.
Kind of suit, though.
It is a different kind of suit. So Ginsburg in a footnote said the court was not deciding, quote, the question of whether Congress has standing to bring a suit against the president. So naturally that means that the court decided that they have standing to bring a suit against the president. This is why non-lawyers shake their head and say, what are you guys talking about? But administration supporters acknowledge that the High Court's opinion in the Arizona case increases the odds the suit will survive. I read that and say, why? And the answer is, it depends how you interpret it.
I guess so. Yeah, I'll have to read through the rest of this, too, because, it starts out sort of by depending on this idea that, as I recall, the description was that revenue bills are supposed to start in the House, but the president would have nothing to do with that. I mean, you could try to say, well, the president doesn't have the authority to spend this money, not because it is or isn't an mandatory spending or an entitlement, but rather because the money should never have been there in the first place because this bill didn't originate in the proper house. I don't see how the origination clause figures into this.
Well, but the House says it does, and so you step back. So you step back and say, "But wait a minute, you guys don't even have standing to bring this up. This is a political argument." And then the court says, "Well, in the past, you guys can't even prove injury. Why in the world would you be entitled to, to bring suit here?" And now there's this new thing that they just invented, which is institutional injury, and then you use that as the precedent for saying, okay, oh yeah, we really were injured because it's an institutional injury, and we do have standing, so we're going to go back and do this, and now you have to take us seriously, and so now this is wrapped up for another couple of years. And again, just shoot me now.
I guess so. I was also wondering whether anyone was going to bring up Noel Canning in this thing, not so much for the legal precedent as for the I don't know what you would call it exactly, but the almost a sociological precedent that the court will take on and overturn hundreds and hundreds of years of actual practice for whatever reason, call it political or partisan, but the idea that hundreds of years of practice and jurisprudence on recess appointments was overturned in order to deal a blow to the Obama administration. They just went and did it. And here, practice as it stands with the origination clause is pretty settled too. That's why I thought it was a kind of a weak case to bring as origination clause. They've fixed this a long time ago. I've told you 100 times about how you just take a House bill in the Senate and strip out all the contents of it, keep the number, and put different legislation in it, and that fixes the origination clause. As infuriating as that might be to the House, they've done it for hundreds of years. You could just stand all the practice on its head from the court and say, we're just doing it. Of course, that would be a big violation of the whole political question doctrine cited in this article. But to hell with that, we want this outcome. And I guess that brings us back to your earlier point of, the things you think are the way the Constitution works might become not the way they work if you have the wrong people making the decisions.
So, I don't know that they necessarily win. I just think there's a bit of harm by the fact that the process, assumes that it's a serious concern. But in the end, it really does matter who's on the Supreme Court because they're the ones that get to decide, not us, no matter how sensible or nonsensical it seems to us at the time. And with that, I will leave you. And again, if Ramondo, who actually knows what he's talking about on this topic, wants to weigh in, that's great. If not, it's out there and not going away. So I'm afraid we're going to have a chance to talk about it yet again because, you just file it under the I can't believe the Supreme Court did that kind of, folder. And I have a feeling it's going to come up again. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. And thanks for listening. I hope you do get Ian on the air today. I'm glad you got Joan on the air yesterday. And we like to be on the air every day when we possibly can. Thanks for listening to us. Thanks to the Netroots Radio folks for making it happen. Tomorrow's Friday. We'll come back. We'll do it again.
Okay. If you say so.
Well, you have to. Sorry.
All right.
Part
I know.
of the
It feels like that. All right. Thanks very much.
For a while. I'll bring up something that maybe you can play with her.
It's well worth doing. I question it every morning at about 8:59, and by 9:10, I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah, well, that's always good. Take care, and we'll talk tomorrow.
All right, you too. All right, yes, as we mentioned, Ian Reifowitz is scheduled for today. We're going to aim for the 10 o'clock hour. Now I feel like we should just rush and do it now while Skype is working. But, everybody needs a chance to get themselves together, get some coffee, get something to eat, and we'll wait for the heads up from him and make sure that he's good and ready and has a cup of water and is ready to go. And we'll go over what he's been writing about, which will pretty much take us everywhere we wanted to go anyway. On Sunday Coast, you would have seen Ian's piece about, I'll read you the headline, the Iran deal. Iran deal foes reach new low in fear-mongering and claim Iran will nuke the U.S. and kill millions. It was hard to miss that one, of course, illustrated as it was with a photograph of an explosion of a hydrogen bomb. That's always fun to look at. and a hydrogen bomb. How old is sounding? So the H bomb. It's a nuclear weapon. Everybody. Let's see, and then also, of course, another piece published on Sunday. The I really am still undecided between Bernie and Hillary piece, which will undoubtedly inflame some of you, and probably for the rest of you will be recognized as a heartfelt, soul-searching piece well worth everybody's time. And then at the end you can all say, and so obviously your conclusion is, and then half of you will say Hillary, and then the other half of you will say Bernie, and one of you will say Martin O'Malley, and none of you will say Lincoln Chafee. And we'll be right back where we started. But at least it will be an honest inquiry into the matter and what's driving things. All right. Also, by the way, a very recent piece, a relatively recent piece from Ian, touching on Iraq and Jeb's insistence that he could do Iraq all over again, but he would totally do it right, not like his other family member who screwed it up, or his other family member who some people think screwed that up too. And, there's no corner we'll leave unexplored, I think, when we speak. All right, let's see. Oh, here's a gun fail update, by the way, something new. Boyfriend teaching girlfriend how to shoot a rifle, accidentally shot. He died. Dang, another one. We'll have to catch up on that one. Where was it? It's a good bet. It's a southern state. Just curious. Not always the case, just, frequently the case. Florida. All right, there you go. Anything else you need to know about Florida Man? Michael Musson commenting that it makes sense that the Republicans want to blame children and undocumented workers instead of examining their own culpability. That's always true. It's more gimmitarianism. Let's see. Deport all the undocumented workers except the cheap labor working for me. That's probably a pretty good explanation of things right there. Other issues swirling around this morning that deserve consideration, plus some that don't, but we'll get some anyway. Is an interesting story. I saw this one yesterday, and I put it aside because I thought, there's something that really deserves some inquiry. I saw, I did not put this tweet aside, but it was essentially noting, I guess there's something going on. It's going on everywhere, but something in particular was identified going on, I guess, on the board of directors or whatever they call it over there at Yale University, in which they discovered that Yale, as an institution, was paying several times more money, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars from the endowment fund, to hedge fund managers for managing its investment portfolio than they were spending on things like getting students to be able to come to Yale and paying for their education, which was rather a surprising way to look at their expenditures. It was something in the neighborhood of $170 million, 172 comes to mind, $1 million in the tweet labeled as spent on students. Now, they're spending more than that on students, but I think they're talking about student aid in particular in that. But that number is pretty big. It may, in fact, mean all sorts of things. I mean, they're spending more on students. Paying professors to teach them is spending on students in a way. Cutting the grass is spending on students in a way. But they were spending some $400+ million in hedge fund management fees to keep them rolling in the money. I mean, I guess when you pare down into it, it'll probably happen that way for a lot of schools. I don't know about everybody, but when you're managing a gigantic endowment, as many of us are. All right, enough of that. What it was, Ashley Madison turn we've taken here on the show. When you're managing an enormous endowment, don't laugh. There are big fees that go with it. Now, of course, hedge fund managers are notorious for taking fees much larger in terms of the raw dollars than anything anybody has ever gotten ever before and is likely to ever get again, except they'll always invent a new way to outdo themselves. I shouldn't say that. And there's an enormous amount of money at stake, and so it's something that they can get away with. As a percentage, it's ridiculous. And, oh, look at this. I'm going to retweet this totally not connected story just so you can all see it, and then I will take note of it in a minute. But when you're when you're that enormous, as I was saying, when you got that much money going around, no one really notices that much when you even though you're taking $400 million. The point is you're making for the university hundreds of millions of dollars more, and so on net it's worth it. But really, honestly, as a percentage being paid, it's too high. And for the amount of actual work and innovation, even if you think of managing a hedge fund as intellectual work and not sweaty work, it's just too much. And at some point, the raw dollars really have to drive things. Anyway, we'll dive into that story. The aside that I just had to retweet, and I noticed many of you are likewise captivated by it. A tweet, let's see, from Raquaya Mays, I'm guessing is the pronunciation, author, journalist, and radio personality as well. Activist, film lover, mom, and Scorpio, in case you were wondering. Tweeting at Raquaya, R-A-Q-I-Y-H, Mays, M-A-Y-S, who makes this observation and illustrates it with this photo, which I assume is legit. Sure looks like him. It says, "Notice we never knew that Trayvon Martin," remember him, "went to space camp." Look at this picture, and here's a picture of him in his space camp uniform in a hangar looking at some airplanes, smiling happily. He went to space camp. How media shapes black boy narrative. That's really something, because we got the pictures of him making, what are reported to be gang signs. We got pictures of him that were fake, doing all sorts of things to make him look like a big old thug. We all know that story already. But yeah, how surprising to never have seen this picture. Weird, man. It's like there was some editorial decisions made along the way. Like, don't show this because that would make, I don't know what. And it wasn't like there wasn't news media that were sympathetic to him either. I don't know. I find that very surprising, and so I retweeted it as well. The photo, by the way, is date stamped. If everything's on the up and up about this photo, we're talking about August 11th, 2009. So, let's see, 5-6 years to the day. Almost. Anyway, how did they never come up with this picture, I wonder? It's regarded as not important somehow. Well, I'm sure you'll all enjoy pondering that as well, as I can tell by the number of retweets it's getting right away. Okay, but back to the story about the Yale endowment. I thought that was really kind of interesting. Did I put away the story itself? No, I didn't. But I thought it was brought up again in a way that I thought made it interesting this morning, as it was tweeted by Gladwell. I don't know Gladwell, and he just tweets as Gladwell, and he's a verified guy as Gladwell, and all it says is he's a skinny Canadian in New York, and then it points to Gladwell.com. Should I know Gladwell? I better look it up. I'll look at Gladwell.com. Malcolm Gladwell. All right. That's a name I recognize after all. I couldn't tell from the little picture. I don't think I know what Malcolm Gladwell looks like at all. Anyway, so what does he say? He says, I'm terrible with these names and pictures, certainly. If a hedge fund guy gives millions to the Yale endowment, this is a really interesting angle on that whole story, I thought. If a hedge fund guy gives millions to the Yale endowment, because he went to Yale, presumably, and then gets millions back for managing the same endowment, what is that called? That is a very interesting question. I'm not actually so interested in what it's called, although we got a good name for it, as what the hell are you doing and why is that allowed? Because note, by the way, what doesn't fit in the tweet here is when you give millions to the Yale endowment, one, you get credit over at the Yale campus for being an awesome guy, awesome enough, in fact, to be put on the board of directors to decide what to do with those millions, including putting it in a hedge fund that you happen to manage. And two, you can control all sorts of things over at Yale. You're a big shot. You're a big macher, as they say, over at Yale, and you can do what you want with it. And in fact, you might even get a seat on the board. That might even actually pay you some additional money, not that you need anymore because you're making millions managing the money you gave. But in between giving that money and getting control of things over at the Yale campus, keep in mind you get an enormous tax deduction for giving that money because it's a charitable deduction. You gave that money to an educational institution. So you take money out of your giant pile that you swim in, like the Uncle Scrooge in Donald Duck, or was it Daffy Duck who went swimming in the money vault? Yeah, maybe that was it. Anyway, you take the money out of your money vault, you give it to Yale, you take a huge tax deduction for yourself, so you end up paying, I'm sure, 0 taxes between that and your other deductions and structuring, etc. You get a big old tax deduction out of it, and then you get all the money back for having managed it. And of course, if you structure it right, it's not. You can structure it as what was it? How did we were talking about this when we were talking about Bain Capital and their structure. It's not just straight up income. It's a kind of return on investment that should be taxed at a lower rate than regular income. So you get a tax break there again. But it interested me, just one, as a scheme, and two, as a reminder that you did, we saw a similar thing, the Texas style version of this. And by the way, we should take a look at the names that people hung on the idea of giving millions to the Yale endowment, then getting the money back by managing it, by having voted yourself the job of managing it. One, of course, calls it capitalism, and that's true. One called hedging, right? Hedge funds, they hedged with their money. Or hedge hogging, I guess is another way. Money laundering, breaking even was the way somebody put it. No. Klepto-capitalism, etc. The one I saw that I liked the best was Ivy rolling. Like log rolling, but log rolling with Ivy League colleges. Well, there's the Texas version of Ivy rolling. Remember, we talked about some time ago. It was the same move, essentially, that that the Texas folks were making. The Texas precious metals dealers who graduated from Texas universities, who gave gigantic portions, a gigantic enough portion of the fortune they made in brokerage fees in precious metals to the University of Texas system, so that they ended up getting a seat on the board as well. And what did they do with their seat on the board? They used it to push the university system into a much larger than necessary and much larger than was really wise position in gold and precious metals, which, by the way, the board miraculously voted to buy from the same precious metals dealers who bought their way onto the board by donating such a gigantic portion of their fortune to the system and then writing it off on their taxes. It's a fantastic deal for like 2 or 3 people in the world who are capable of doing such things and finding university systems where you can make that work. It's a little bit more egregious when you do it with a public school system, of course, like the University of Texas systems, than when you do it with Yale, but it's still pretty egregious when you stop and think about what's actually happened here. It's great you made lots and lots of money in hedge funds. Fantastic. But the idea of the university endowments, supposedly, is that more kids get to go to school at those places now and incur less debt in doing it. Not that you would be, rolling it over as an investment. Ivy rolling it over as an investment. I don't know. Maybe they're... And it's not hard to deal with either. At first blush, I'm looking at it and saying, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. They're just brilliant at structuring their finances. But there are self-dealing laws that could probably be brought to bear on something like this. For one thing, I don't know, maybe they did recuse themselves from board votes as to what should happen to the money or all of the endowment fund. I guess I can even guess that they probably did, but I can also probably guess that a grateful board, I mean, if you come to the table with hundreds of millions of dollars to donate, the other board members know what to do. They know you're going to recuse yourself from the vote for propriety's sake, but to thank you adequately for having sent so much money their way, and not to their pockets necessarily, although they do get rewarded handsomely, I'm sure, for serving on the board of directors of Yale University. But, you know, their job is to raise money for the university. They're happy when hundreds of millions of dollars comes in for the university, and they know what to do. With a wink and a nod, they will all agree, without your participation and without your probably even having to ask them, to go with a manager for their hedge fund investments, which are a good investment by any stretch and by any measure. They want to go with a manager that they know and trust. And the one they know and trust is the one who, A, went to Yale, B, made a fortune in that area, so you could guess that he might also make a fortune for you in that area. And you have the accountability of having him on the board. So if he screws you over totally, you can really get angry. You'll have lost all your money, but you can kick him off the board. I guess you have that. And gosh, we trust him because here he is, one of us. We deal with him all the time. And it makes an awful lot of sense on its face. It makes a little less sense when the issue is, should we invest in hedge funds, which by all accounts, as much as it's cheating and as much as they're management are widely known to be greedy bastards, still a better investment overall by the numbers than gold, at least at this point in the gold game. And yet, down in Texas, they managed to let themselves get convinced to play the gold game because they voted the wrong guys onto the board. Of course, they were enticed to vote the wrong guys onto the board by a gigantic donation. And it's hard to see how they get past that. I mean, that's the kind of operations they run there. Give them lots and lots of money, and you can start calling the shots. All right. Well, let's see. Where else could we go? I told you that there were some stories that definitely did not deserve coverage, but we're going to get it anyway because funny. How about D's nuts? Not, yeah. I mean, the guy who calls himself D's nuts, who isn't the real guy, as it turns out. Apparently, lots of discussion yesterday. I missed the initial part of this story because why would I pay attention to such a thing? But apparently, our good friends over at Public Policy Polling did a poll in where? North Carolina, right? And found that I had heard that there was such a candidate. It turns out that there is not, but I had heard that there was someone who had registered as a candidate for president under the name D's Nuts, which we all know to be a big joke and cultural meme in its own right. And that North Carolina polling by PPP found D's Nuts standing, I don't know what place this put him in, but standing at 9% in the polls, higher than many actual people who were running for president. We assume it was all a big joke and people basically looking at the choices and saying, to hell with it all, I'll vote for D's Nuts. And then I think Trump actually referenced the poll the other day too. Anyway, the bigger story is that there is no person actually calling himself D's Nuts and running for president and doing all the dumb things that get done by fringe candidates who run like Vermin Supreme, who's a real person, even if that's not a real name, and goes around and does the things that a fringe candidate does. So at least there's that. Well, D's Nuts apparently is just what, dumb name, the kid, and it is a kid, a 15-year-old from Iowa who pulled this off and registered this name and did nothing more, I don't think. But now we'll just go straight to this part, the backstory from the Daily Beast, who reports this exclusively, although I don't know how exclusive they've been able to keep it. Presidential sensation D's Nuts is a 15-year-old Iowa farm boy. How about that? The candidate polling at 9% in North Carolina against Trump and Clinton isn't a real person, but Brady Olson, who gamed the FEC filing system, certainly is. And you would think that this would be a difficult thing to do. You know, for all the people who insist on seeing long-form birth certificates, could we at least see that you're a human being at some point? But I guess not, because there's a cat registered to run for president as well. D's nuts, the independent candidate from Iowa, is polling at 9% in North Carolina for president of the United States. Sadly, D's nuts does not appear to exist, but Brady Olson does. And here he is quoted. When I heard about the Limberbutt McCubbins story, I realized I could. Olson tells the Daily Beast. The what story? They'll get to it. That's the paragraph that should come next if I'm editing the piece. But instead comes, Brady Olson is 15 years old. Already knew that. From your story, as a matter of fact. But by all means, tell me again. He filed to run for president of the United States with the FEC. Already know that. On July 26th, did not know that, as D's nuts. Knew that. That was a real waste. Editor. All right, so here is then embedded in the story, question 31 from the PPP poll. Do you have a favorable... I love the fact that they got to ask this one. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of D's nuts? And that's what it was all about. That was the payoff. And Brady Olson didn't even really get to see it until now. Only 6% of respondents had a favorable opinion of D's nuts. 13% had an unfavorable opinion of D's nuts. And 81% were not sure because they hadn't yet seen, I guess, D's nuts. Wow. According to a public policy polling survey released Wednesday, almost 1 in 10 Tar Heel state voters would vote for him in a race between nuts, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton, which is in fact your choice, by the way. And only now do they get around to saying, parenthetically, by the way, that Limberbutt McCubbins, by the way, is a cat from Kentucky seeking the Democratic nomination for president. According to this story herein linked to NPR.org. That really needed to be moved up a few spaces. Dozens of real D's nutses, or D's nutses with a Z, do live as citizens in the United States of America with legally changed names, which is an astonishing story all by itself, that dozens of people have changed their name to D's nuts and live to tell about it. They are from all over the place. Phoenix, Arizona, West Hartford, Connecticut, from sea to shining sea, in fact. But a potential president does not appear to be one of them. According to a Federal Election Commission filing, the D's nuts running for president lives at 2248 450th Avenue in Wallingford, Iowa. Look it up. The problem, however, is that there is no D's nuts who lives in Wallingford, Iowa. It's one of the few towns in America without one. It's a tiny town of 197 people, so it's easy to check, according to the Emmett County Recorder's Office. Seriously? Emmett County Recorder's Assistant Jill White asked when the Daily Beast mentioned that there was a federally registered presidential candidate by the name of D's Nuts and that a reporter was requesting information on a resident by that name. There's only Brady Olson, the son of a farmer and a dental assistant and a rising sophomore. That's not the third parent. He's the rising sophomore. You get it? At the Gradinger Terrell Ruthven Ayrshire Community School .com.edu in rural Iowa. What kind of... That's a lot of names for a school in a community with 197 people. Now he's trying to figure out his path to becoming the first 15-year-old president of the United States under an assumed name. I know, it's a tough road to hoe. Tough row to hoe. Tough. How does that little saying go? We're going to have to repeal part of the Constitution for that one. Article 2, Section 1, I assume. Well, let's see. Clause 1, 2. Well, the third clause was since repealed, but obviously, you have to be 35 years of age and an actual person. I would assume that somehow comes under the penumbra of Article 2, Section 1, that you have to be a real live actual person. But you have to be 35, but we can certainly work on that and repeal it as well. So how to become the first 15-year-old president of the United States under an assumed name? Good question. The next step is to get some party nominations, like the Minnesota Independence Party or the Modern Whig Party, Olson says. It would be great to find a VP, preferably McCubbins, because the Nuts McCubbins ticket sounds amazing. Kid's got his finger on the pulse of the electorate in ways that even Donald Trump has not yet reached. Trump, call this boy. So, how did Brady Olson go from standard Iowa high school student to the #1 trending topic on Twitter literally overnight? It started because somebody emailed us under the name D's Nuts, says Jim Williams, an issue polling specialist at Public Policy Polling. He said, I'm D's Nuts. I'm running. Here's my filing statement. Would you poll me? No, don't go over there in that direction, you crazy double entendre people. Williams thought this is something public policy polling would do. And I thought so too, and that's why we love them so much. So he squared nuts off against Clinton and Trump in Minnesota a few weeks ago. He polled at 7%. I thought, let's put this out. This will be funny, he says, and it was met with, quote, mild interest. Tough row to hoe. That's what I thought too, says Rebecca Romans. Row, right? And I guess the D sound comes from the T, and people. I have heard people say tough road to hoe, and like you wouldn't hoe a road, you would hoe a row in a garden. All right, that's the only way that it makes sense to me. Thanks, Rebecca. Hope we're right on that one. So things work at PPP exactly the way I thought they did, and Jim Williams drives it. It's funny, so let's do it. I'm in agreement with you there. Uh-oh, my screen is flashing. Oh, look at this, an unresponsive script. Luckily, it's happening on the other computer, not the one that's running the show this morning. When D's Nuts' numbers rose after two more polls, 8% in Iowa, his home state, then 9% in North Carolina, Nuts took off. On Wednesday, D's Nuts was trending worldwide on Twitter. Question 32 from the poll is then embedded. If the candidates for president next year were Democrat Hillary Clinton, Republican Donald Trump, and Independent D's Nuts, who would you vote for? Answer 38% Hillary Clinton, 40% Donald Trump, 9% D's Nuts. Not sure, 12%. Today, we've clearly reached the tipping point, says Williams. There is no 911 listing. 911? I imagine they meant 411 listing corresponding to that of 2248 450th Street, though there ought to be a 911 listing there, perhaps. According to officials at the Emmett County Registry of Deeds, next door at 2250 450th Street in Wallingford sits Olson Land and Livestock, which is owned by Brady's dad, Mark Olson. Anybody can fill out a Form 2, says FEC Deputy Press Officer Christian Hilland. We do vetting, but it's more about did they fill out the information correctly? Did they review the fields? It doesn't speak to the authenticity of the individual who filed the claim. Nuts did, in fact, fill out a Form 2, a statement of candidacy, on July 26th. The form had no information other than the Wallingford address and his independent party affiliation. Fellow Form 2 filers for the 2016 election cycle include Sydney's Voluptuous Buttocks, one of my favorites, Kenny Rodeo, who probably is even a serious dude, Eden, and Old Savior. Savior, a Republican, ran and lost in 4 other elections since 2006. Savior and Nuts joined President Emperor Caesar, Buddy the Cat, Buddy the Elf, Jack Sparrow, James Titus the Great Law, Princess, what? I can't figure out how to pronounce that nonsense word. And Donald Trump. Points for that. You score. Ugh, who wrote this thing? I don't know if I even mentioned it. But credit here goes to Ben Collins and Emily Shire for that one and for cracking me up. Yeah, all these idiots, plus also Donald Trump, all filed Form 2s for the 2016 race for the presidency. You can fill out your own Form 2 here, and it's linked, by the way, in case you want to do something fun. And good news, none of the fields are immediately checked against public records searches. You, too, can be D's Nuts from Wallingford, Iowa. The problems will only start to appear when your grassroots campaign for the presidency starts to receive the support of almost 1/10 of the residents of North Carolina. We check for things like, what election cycle are you running in? If one or more of those fields are missing, we have campaign finance analysts who review those reports, said Hilliand. We send a letter to the listed address that asks for clarification or an amendment. Also, if he or she raises $5,000, whoever lives at 2248 450th Avenue is going to have to come up with a real name. Nuts will then have to file a Form 1, which requires a name, phone number, and address that check out. And again, the name doesn't check out. There's a breakdown here, by the way, embedded on These Nuts favorability. Favorable ratings, the base 6% favorable. Ages 18 to 29 give him his best response, 15%. Older than 65 is worst, of course, 2%. Nobody wants to see these 65-year-old plus nuts. Unfavorable, 13% overall. Unfavorable, also highest number, though, coming from age 18 to 29. So they know what these nuts is about. They disapprove of it in numbers greater than twice of approval. But there you have it. And by the way, lowest unfavorable ratings also come from older than 65. So you never know. Not sure, 81% overall. 49% of those 18 to 29 were not sure what to make of these nuts, whereas 94% of those older than 65 were baffled by these nuts. That's the numbers that make sense to me. Again, as we said, the name doesn't check out. So then, let's see. Brenda Moore, back at the Emmett County Treasurer's Office, was asked about this stuff and says, the name isn't familiar to me. Do you really think it's a legitimate name? No, we don't. The county of just over 10,000 people, or depending on the demographics, something in the neighborhood of, I would say, probably about 10,000 nuts as well, had no idea an alleged independent frontrunner from their neighborhood was earning national headlines. I haven't heard a word, not a word about it, says Amy Satoff of the Emmett County Auditor's Office. She chuckled when the Daily Beast asked her to search these nuts in her records. Seems kind of odd, she said, but confirmed that no person with that last name owns property in Emmett County. Since he began polling near double digits, Olson even began offering concrete positions on his Facebook page. He's now come out for a balanced budget. He's come out in favor of the Iran deal, says Williams. These nuts is starting to get serious. Joking aside, Williams, remember the guy from PPP, says Nuts' high polling numbers show that clearly there's some kind of floor here for third-party entities that's rising. I think having Trump as part of the poll helps push that number up because it leaves room for the non-hardcore Republicans who are not going to get on board with Donald Trump, says Williams. Plus, there's the logistical reason Nuts is polling so well. These polls are pretty long. By the time we drop these nuts on them, they're pretty deep into the poll. Oh, my Lord. Williams says, then pauses. The jokes write themselves. Be careful. But now, Olson is emboldened by his rising poll numbers. Despite the hurdles, the president has to be at least 35 to take office. After all, he plans on winning the whole thing. The U.S. would have to pass an amendment to take out Article 2, says Olson, but Congress wouldn't do that. Oh, they'd love to take out Article 2. They're suing Article 2 right now. That's what Greg was just telling us. But Congress wouldn't do that after being so embarrassed after losing to these nuts. Could be. It would certainly upset them a great deal. No doubt about that. All right. Well, let's get this non-responsive script off the screen and check in with things here. Yes. I guess Ian was having some trouble with Skype too, but he's ready now. So why don't we just make that our business? And of course, I didn't set this up very well, so now I got to go and search all my contacts. All right, there we are. Let's we'll dial Ian on our Skype and see how it goes from there. It doesn't make any noise, I don't think, when you're dialing a Skype number. There you are. Hey, Ian, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay. I'm glad we got things working. Did you have trouble with Skype in the beginning of the day, too?
Yeah.
What happened? Does it just crash on you for no apparent reason?
Well, no, it just froze my whole computer. I couldn't even do force quit. I had to just shut down with the power button.
Wow, I don't know. I'm finding a lot of problems myself with Skype. I'll have to ask Greg how he's doing with that too. He hasn't complained, but hasn't been treating us very well lately. Shame on you, Skype.
It may have been that I had it open at the same time as I was on, had the browser open, so now I have all my browsers closed.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. You should be able to run both, but hey, what do I know? At least you're here.
Exactly.
Okay. So yeah, I had some trouble on Tuesday that pretty much shut everything down too. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes, me too.
All right, so let's see. I've been catching everybody up on what you've been writing, just headline-wise, in the last couple of days. They would have seen two pieces from you on Sunday last, right?
Right.
Iran deal and how low the fearmongers are going these days, plus your own self-examination. And no pun intended. Having transitioned from the D's Nuts story. The self-examination as between what to do as between Bernie and Hillary.
Right.
And I see that's up to 752, I'm sure, hotly contested comments at the moment. Is anybody confused as to how you could be so foolish as to not see immediately that their candidate is the right choice for you?
Shockingly, there are a couple who are confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to make the choice as to which of the two stories to start with, but I'll leave that up to you. What's got most of your attention, or if there's another direction or comments on headlines of the day?
I think probably we can talk longer about Hillary and Bernie. So if it makes sense to get the shorter one out of the way first,
right.
But
Sure.
that's really you're the producer, so whatever you think is better.
All right. Well, let's start with if you were scrolling backward on Ian's output on the front page, you'll hit the Iran story first. So let's start there.
Okay.
Now, I noted that it was illustrated by one of the old archival photos of a hydrogen bomb test. Is what it looks like. Although it also looks like one of those scrubbing bubbles from the bathroom cleaner commercials.
Yes.
But it's not. It's much more deadly.
Much. That's a great photo. I think Tim, Media Blades put it up there.
Okay. Yeah. Attribution, U.S. Army. Good job,
there you
U.S. Army. Yeah. So I guess that's what it's come to now. That that's always kind of what has been at stake in the background with the Iran thing. The idea being, of course, we don't want them to get a nuclear weapon because they could use it. But the argument to this point has always been that they would use it against Israel.
Exactly.
And now
that's where it comes in.
They have intercontinental ballistic delivery capability, and they're going to use it on the United States. They're going to build. They're going to get a 6-pack, and use the 3 on Israel and 3 on us, or something like that. That's never been in the offing, as far as I understood it. But is this just they just went for it because you think they thought they could scare people into opposing the deal better that way?
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, sure. There's nothing scarier than blowing you up rather than blowing up somebody else. Yes.
That's true. And also, I was wondering whether any of this came out of, the theory always was, of course, that the Iranians, and they've very often stated as much, that they wanted to destroy Israel. And I guess, I don't know, maybe they took some of the punch out of that. The Christian dominionists who have always sort of, secretly been hoping that would happen because that's a part of their plan for the second coming of Jesus. And I guess that wasn't scary enough. There were people who were enthused about that. Oh, yes, but also you'll get nuked.
Right.
Now you have me.
That puts a damper on things.
Yes. It would be awful for Jesus to come back and get nuked. I assume he'd be vulnerable to that.
Right. I mean, the ad did target Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, and you could think that the citizens of New Jersey, or that his constituents, it's more abstract for them. to be worrying about Israel than it is for them to be worrying about New Jersey.
Yeah, typically.
Plus, they just want to break through the clutter. I mean, if everybody else is saying, if all the crazies are saying one thing, and you want to be a little crazier, then you got to say something a little crazier and that's how you get more attention.
Yeah.
I guess.
I guess so. Whose ad was this?
This is an ad from Values. Name escapes me all of a sudden. Values for America. No.
Let's see. I'll see if I can scroll through too.
Yeah, but the person behind it is Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who folks might remember was a close associate of Michael Jackson. No comment there.
Huh.
But it is a very conservative rabbi, and shockingly. I don't remember his whole association with Michael Jackson.
Me neither. The name is a little familiar, but I wouldn't put Jackson with it. But okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, at some point you want to try not to think too hard about some of these connections because it's just brain cells you'll lose.
Yeah.
This is another organization behind it is the Zionist Organization of America, which they certainly don't represent all American Jews or American Zionists, but they'll claim the name for themselves. I mean, look, this is the AIPAC crowd. Maybe they're doing it in a less sophisticated way than AIPAC would. I don't see AIPAC. I wouldn't put anything past anybody. But this is, you take out an ad in the New York Times to some degree to get attention. Not only to reach the person, who's named in the ad, Senator Booker, but to get discussion going in the media. And sometimes I wonder if those of us who realize how crazy this kind of an ad is wouldn't be better off ignoring it. But on the other hand, when it's so crazy, and I think we're talking about it among an audience that is not going to be convinced by it suddenly from hearing about it. Mm-hmm. It's worth exposing. It's worth exposing the extremists because it taints the entire, and rightfully so, it taints the entire opposition to the Iran deal. It just shows you how outside of the bounds of reality their thinking is and their tactics are. I mean, this is a deal that's going to pass. Whether or not the president is forced to veto it or not is a formality. His veto will be upheld. It was the newest count is that we've already got 31 Democratic senators who have either said yes or said they're leaning that way. They're not going to go back from it. Why would they? And so you only need a handful of the remaining 15 to go along, and only a few of them have, I believe, only 2 Democrats have already come out against it. That's Senators Schumer and Menendez. So the votes are there. I guess when you get desperate, you scream a little louder, and that's what they're doing.
All right. Well, that's as loud as it gets, I think. Like the Daisy ad, I guess. But worse. This is interesting. I was just sort of clicking through the Wikipedia profile on the rabbi. Interesting character, to say the least. And it's interesting what kind of mainstream validation he's gotten in the past, which, now you should look askance at, I guess, in terms of, let's see, Newsweek magazine having named him one of the 50 most influential rabbis in the United States 3 years in a row, which I guess, I don't know how high that bar really is, but
right.
50 rabbis, okay. But here's the interesting connection. I thought, okay, why Cory Booker? And I figured, all right, well, the rabbi himself is from New Jersey, or he lives in New Jersey, at least currently.
That's true. I forgot.
That makes some sense. And, of course, Senator Menendez needs no convincing. So there's that. But there's also an interesting connection, it notes here, and I'll just read you the paragraph because this is weird. In 1988, Boteach, I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name, but was sent at age 22 by also a very controversial figure in the Orthodox and Hasidic communities, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, whose name will ring a bell to New York areas folks. This rabbi is sent by Schneerson as a Chabad Lubavitch emissary to Oxford, England, where he served as a rabbi to Oxford's students for 11 years, and during that time founded the L'Chaim Society. Under Boteach's leadership, the Oxford L'Chaim Society grew to be the second largest student organization in Oxford's history. So he's I guess, a bit of a magnetic guy, with a membership that included over 5,000 non-Jews. Interesting. A dispute erupted when Boteach was asked to remove some non-Jewish students from the society, but refused. And among the students he was asked to kick out was future Senator Cory Booker. Interesting. Wow. So there's, I guess, some personal relationship that goes back some ways. And later that year, Boteach, by the way, won Preacher of the Year award from the Times. Later named one of the top 50 rabbis in America, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, listed at number 6 in that. But so going back to 1988, a connection, although I guess at some point later on, after 88, when he forms this society. So a long-standing relationship. Maybe he thought he could call upon that relationship with Cory Booker that way. I assume he tried something back channel first, and it didn't work, so he went nuclear on the ads. I wonder if that's going to sour things with Senator Booker, or end the relationship entirely, or what? That'd be.
Who knows? I mean, I assume he also is trying to get constituents to make lots of phone calls and say. And by the way, the organization that he is that created the ad is something called the World Values Network, and this rabbi is the executive director of that organization.
Okay.
I mean, look, I think the point, I made at the end of the article, at the end of the post is, who are you going to trust? Somebody who is basically demagoguing the issue, or somebody who is an expert in the field and who is relying on facts and reason? I mean, the comparison is to Gary Seymour, who was the president of an organization called United Against the Nuclear Iran, which is a pretty, which is no pushover in terms of this deal. And he had said in the spring that he didn't think there was any way that the U.S. and Iran could negotiate a deal over Iran's nuclear program that he could support. Well, when he saw this deal, he said, I was wrong. This is a good deal. This is not, the Congress should back this deal. We're not going to get anything better. And once he came out took that position, he actually had to resign the presidency of United Against a Nuclear Iran, because he was going, here is somebody inclined to oppose it and came around when he saw the specifics. I think that's pretty telling.
I would say so. That's pretty remarkable. And then, of course, having to resign it and the position, and here he is probably doing the most by backing the deal that he could possibly be doing to prevent the nuclear Iran, and they're kicking him out of the organization. Oh well.
Exactly. Well, that organization is not united against the nuclear Iran. It's united in favor of the Netanyahu line, the conservative American line. That, by the way, when Mr. Seymour resigned, that organization went out and got our old friend Joe Lieberman to take over.
All right. Well, I guess they were in a rush, and they needed somebody quick, and that was an obvious choice.
He's available.
Yes, right. And you owe us for that one, guys. Finder's fee, 10% of his salary to Daily Kos. We made him available, so we ought to get paid for that. Let's see. I also, I found that really, that's a remarkable bit of, I guess, political gymnastics they had to pull off there in order to get that one right. All right. I think that's really the most crystalline example I can think of finding a person who had every reason, professional, philosophical, etc., to oppose the deal, and then simply looking at it and saying, "This is really, I was wrong. I got to tell you, you got to go the other direction on this."
And willing to resign his job for it.
Yeah,
willing to lose his job for it. I mean, I don't know if it's a paid position. I'm not going to go into I didn't dig into the.
So may not be the case.
But either way, it shows real integrity, and then there's Joe Lieberman.
Yeah. who had nothing else going on. It was interesting. This also came to mind yesterday as I was retweeting something I saw from Paul Waldman, no relation, yesterday. I mentioned it on the air yesterday. I thought this and the Joe Lieberman situation and this rabbi all sort of fit into all of this. He tweeted out a picture that Mike Huckabee had sent out of himself. I guess he's on a trip to Israel now and was at a conference that purported to be a conference on Israeli security and the Iran deal going forward. And I guess it didn't strike him because he's not particularly connected to a real part of the American Jewish community. He thought this, I guess, would be awesome with Jewish voters to tweet out a picture that he was in Israel for a serious conference on the history of or the future of Israeli security and the Iran deal, and he was taking a picture with, look who I ran into, the guy from Duck Dynasty is here at this conference on the security of Israel. And Paul tweeted out, this right here is why American Jewish community has largely become ambivalent to the politics of the state of Israel at this point. And that's, I think, really hit the nail on the head. I mean, having been a latecomer to the position that as an American Jewish voter, I really did have to take an interest in where the future of Israel, the state of Israel, was going. I've been, it was a long time coming for me, and I got turned right off. The fact that you can now have supposedly serious discussions at serious conferences about the future of the state of Israel, and that the key players are Mike Huckabee and the Duck Dynasty guy, that doesn't really resonate with me. You're going to have to do better than that if you want me back, and maybe you don't. And I'm happy to be there.
He has a really long beard. Maybe they thought he was a rabbi.
That could be. They were possibly fooled into that. But I've never seen, for instance, look at his head. He is wearing a head covering, but that should be a dead giveaway that he's not a rabbi. It's a bandana.
They should have asked us.
Yes, I could have told you who it was. And I guess maybe in Israel they thought, I don't know anything about it, but I heard Duck Dynasty is a very popular program, and here's a guy running for president. This will get Americans and Jewish Americans to pay attention. And, a phone call would have told you no. But anyway, I thought that was a good point. It doesn't need to take up the rest of the show, of course, but a good point by Paul Waldman. I think that they're really doing themselves some serious damage. They had done a relatively good job re-engaging the American Jewish community in Israeli politics for a while. And then, of course, the Palestinian conflict really damaged it. And this is like the last, the final nail in the coffin. Now, what relationship do I have that would be worth admitting to with the current government of the State of Israel, given that they're doing that this is how they deal with the next big, supposedly existential problem, is that the Duck Dynasty guy gets asked his opinion and come to the conference. And, not that they were going to call me, but that's clearly more important to them than the opinion of actually liberal, actually moderate majority of American Jews. Okay. I mean, I don't know who organized the conference, and maybe we shouldn't impute their motives to the entire government, but, something weird is happening here.
Definitely.
All right. Well, no surprise to those of us who have watched Dominionist Christians travel to Israel for years and say, gosh, do I love Israel. I can't wait to blow it up and kill everybody here. That's how much I love it. And no one bats an eye. Oh, well.
With those kind of friends, right, David?
Yes, right. Well, the good news, we're used to it, right? We've always been growing up and going to Hebrew school. I never heard the end of how Israel was surrounded by enemies. And why just surround yourself when you can also infuse yourself with enemies? Give that a shot.
Yeah, right? I mean, why not?
Okay, well, moving to the other topic, which will likely take us a while to deal with and is of great interest to the audience, your piece on your indecision as between Bernie and Hillary. Did you expect to have decided by now, or are you usually undecided at this point? I usually am.
I'm not that surprised. Not that I want to take a walk down memory lane, but, I was even somewhat undecided until after the Iowa caucuses last time. I really liked what John Edwards was saying about the two Americas, but I also liked Obama's position on the war, on the Iraq war, and then honestly, it was Obama's victory speech in Iowa and the vision he framed for America, which really captured me, and ended up actually shaping the book I wrote, which was on. So I mean, it was that speech. That was the first time I had really heard him make that kind of a speech, and I already liked his policies in general. And Edwards was gone within a few weeks anyway. But that night, Obama won me over. So that was January of 2008. So we've got a few more months before I'm at that point.
Okay. I mean, I think it's fair enough to stay open at this point. It's really early, and I've never really gotten in the habit of making an early declaration anyway, as I've never lived in a state that voted early enough to make a difference in that respect. But, early support even from people who aren't going to vote yet is a big deal and is part of the momentum building that turns you into a major candidate. So, well, I don't know. We can just dive right in and discuss a little bit about what it is that is pulling at you from both camps, unless you think that'll start fires again. But we're into that, actually.
Sure. Actually, on a very related note, I just saw today something that really surprised me in polling. Quinnipiac has a new swing state poll out. It was Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And this was a real surprise. It showed Joe Biden running stronger against the top Republicans, I think it was Trump, Bush, and Rubio, than Hillary. Stronger than Hillary. That was surprising. It had him. Hillary was losing to Trump in a couple of the states, not Florida, but Biden was beating Trump at least in all three, whereas Hillary wasn't beating him in all three. Look, the details are mind-numbing to some degree, but it was the first time I'd seen head-to-head. And that same Quinnipiac poll also tested Bernie against all three, and he was running way behind Hillary and Biden in terms of relative strength. Again, he was getting crushed by all three in most of the states. I think Bernie obviously did a little better against Trump than against Bush and Rubio. But the point is, in my post, I had reviewed some recent polling that showed Hillary a bit stronger than Bernie, relatively, speaking, against the Republicans. But with that gap closing, this new thing from Quinnipiac shows Bernie well weaker, much weaker. So who knows what all that means? But electability plays a big part. It's not the only part, but by far. But I think one of the things that I said was, if I really felt that one of the two candidates, and at this point that Hillary looks more electable than Bernie, but that could shift, obviously. Anything can happen. Sure. If I got to a point where I felt like one of them had a more than a small chance of winning where the other one would lose, that's a deal breaker. That's a deal breaker. It doesn't matter to me that I like one better than the other. If the one I like better is likely to lose and the other one is likely to win, then you got to vote for the winner because you want the winner to get the nomination because you want to win the general election. Period. End of story. And that's sort of the conclusion I came to. And this is true. Sometimes we read a lot on Daily Kos from some posters who say it's not enough to be motivated to vote against somebody. You've got to be motivated to vote for somebody. I'm sorry, but if anybody who studies politics knows that negative emotions are very powerful, and whatever it is I like within the Democratic Party or I don't like within the Democratic Party, I know they're better than the Republicans, and that is an exceptionally powerful motivator. They are significantly better than the Republicans, light years better than the Republicans. Any Democrat that I'm aware of, at least, who's in the presidential campaign, even Jim Webb, who I don't particularly care for, would be light years better than the Republicans. So that's really important to me. Elections are about winning. And because winning an election is how you pass laws that implement your vision. Yes. And ultimately, the question is the country going to have laws that are better or laws that are worse? And having laws that are better is better. And having laws that are worse is worse.
I would have to agree.
I'm jumping ahead there. But, some of the other things that I talked about in the article are that I do find myself more ideologically in sync with Bernie Sanders than I do with Hillary Clinton. I think Hillary Clinton ideologically, as I said, is far better than any Republican, but I do feel that some of what Bernie says about the economic power of the elites is really important. I think he would go farther than Hillary in terms of the changes that he would push on that front. Whether it's campaign finance reform specifically, but I think more even just in terms of the kinds of regulations that regulatory framework that Bernie Sanders appointees at, let's say, Treasury or the Security and Exchange Commission, they would be doing very, very different things than I think the kinds of people Hillary would appoint in terms of regulating whether it's Dodd-Frank or some of the other laws that have been passed. That matters, and that has nothing to do with congressional legislation. That's pure appointees. I mean, we've seen what Obama's been able to do on the regulatory side, whether it's environment or auto emissions or any. I mean, look, there's countless areas where the executive branch has sway.
Yes.
So I think that's an important piece. I think Bernie's probably, is certainly probably stronger on the environment. I mean, you can go down the line in terms of these kinds of issues. Foreign policy, we don't know that much about what Bernie thinks on foreign policy. Hillary has a history of being probably a bit more hawkish than I'd like. Again, the Iraq War in 2003 did not show her in the best light. So, again, if you're talking about a general election and those are the two candidates, you got to look at it very differently. One of those two is going to win. This is a primary election, but I do think Bernie has some great ideas. I'm thrilled that he's in the race. I think he's at least providing enough of a test to Hillary that she's going to have to sharpen her skills and do well. And I think she has done well in terms of campaign, whatever you want to call it, strategy. I think she's been very smart to hit at people like Jeb Bush and like Marco Rubio to show that she's going to be able to not just be reactive but proactive in terms of what kind of general election candidate she would be. The real question that even more so than a few days ago, thanks to this, I think this Quinnipiac poll is a big deal. It's a very big deal, not because of what it shows, but because of what it might convince somebody like Joe Biden to do, which is namely get in the race. Yeah. Joe Biden is not going to get in the race if he doesn't think he can win. I still think it's less than the 50% likelihood that he gets in. But if people start to say, oh man, what if the whole point of Hillary, not the whole point of Hillary, but the whole point of Hillary being a better candidate than Biden is that she's a stronger general election candidate, because they're not that different in terms of their policy positions. I mean, they are, and no two people are the same. Anyway, now people are going to go to Biden and say, look, she's going to lose and you're going to win. We need you in there. That's a powerful motivator. I don't think there's anybody else in the Democratic field who could come in and shake it up at this point. Who is even entertaining the idea? Al Gore is not entertaining the idea. Elizabeth Warren is not entertaining the idea. Joe Biden clearly is entertaining the idea. Yeah. Why would I vote for Joe Biden over Hillary Clinton? Their positions as fairly, middle of the road liberals, although Biden, it's easy to say on the one hand, Biden's more progressive than Hillary. On the other hand, I remember when Biden was seen as the senator from, what was the name of that credit card company? Senator from such and such credit card company, because he pushed for all these bills that would benefit, corporations in Delaware. I don't remember. It might have been a bankruptcy rewrite, rewrite of the bankruptcy bill in the mid 2000s. Anyway, the point is Biden.
Okay. Was
senator from Biden. It might have been, Biden too. It was a senator from MBNC, some credit card company that's not even around. Thank you, MBNA. Very good. They probably have a basketball arena named after them or something like that. Anyway, so there's electability, there's the issues, and then the third thing I think is coattails, which also relates to electability. If I was to assume that, let's say, both Hillary and Bernie have an roughly equal chance of winning, but that Hillary could bring in 3 or 4 more senators. Well, now I got to start thinking about that at least a little bit. And if she could make a difference between having a Democratic Senate or not having a Democratic Senate, well, now that's a really big deal, because in some ways it's certainly top 5 ways that a president influences the course of American governance is through judicial appointments.
Yes.
And a Democratic Senate can do a hell of a lot more appointing of a Democratic president's judges than a Republican Senate can. Granted that we're in year 7, it would be different in year 1, but we're seeing how badly the Republican Senate is slow walking President Obama's nominees. There's a front page post right now that to this point, August 20th of his 7th year, the Republican Senate has confirmed 5 Obama nominees to the judiciary. 5 compares to 11 that President Clinton got in his 7th year to this point, and 26, I believe, if my memory serves, 26 that George W. Bush got from a Democratic Senate to by August 20th of his 7th year. 26 to 5. The Constitution doesn't work, frankly, if one side presses its partisan advantage to the degree that the other side either has to respond in kind, or it's not exercising its democratic mandate. I mean, it's crazy. 5 judges in 8 months, and this is before the August recess. So electability matters most obviously in terms of the top of the ticket, but switching the Senate is a big deal as well. So that's one of the things I said in the article, that maybe nominating the quote unquote less progressive candidate could end up making the country more progressive if the more progressive candidate was unable to do some of the things that he or she wanted to do. And I think, incremental change matters, right? We can all talk about the long run. I see people writing, well, we should let things get if we let things get really, really bad, then they'll crash and then we'll have real change. I'm sorry, no.
Please don't.
Please don't. I mean, there's the long run, but right as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. I think anything you can do to help people right now is worth doing. Everybody, each of us, to get a little philosophical, everybody listening to your program is only alive once. And so the idea that you would sacrifice positive change now for the hope of bigger positive change later, that's a hell of a gamble. And I'm not a radical. I mean, as a historian, I've seen radical changes produce really pretty bad results, both when the radicals get what they want, and then also even when they don't get what they want, but they create a huge, and this is more likely, they create a huge reactionary backlash, and we get even worse. We're even worse than when we started off. So I believe in incremental change and in reform, and that's why I'm a Democrat and not something else that might be to our left. So we did get a little philosophical there, a little historical, and then a little down and dirty political. So I think we've covered a number of bases there.
Well, three very frequently used approaches to making a decision like this. But you and this raises another interesting point, I guess, bringing the Senate back into it too. It will make a big political outcome difference, I would guess, in the makeup of the Senate if the top of your ticket loses. That rarely helps in electing a Democratic. You're not, in other words, very unlikely to come out flipping the Senate to Democratic control if the Democratic candidate doesn't also win the White House. I mean, it's not impossible, obviously, they're different races, but you tend to do an awful lot better down ticket when the top of your ticket is winning. And so electability will probably make a huge difference in the outcome of this control of the Senate as well. And so though it's possible that you could certainly win and have a Democratic president and still a narrowly Republican Senate, it would be very unlikely to find any other result. If a Republican were to win the White House, almost certainly they would retain control of the Senate. I doubt very much whether things would switch. And so I guess in terms of choosing who will head the ticket. That's another area where electability makes a big difference. You're thinking only about the White House. You need to also think about the Senate as well. I know, and it all seems terribly unfair in the abstract world of the primary, where people will remind you, well, if everybody who really believed in what, say, Bernie Sanders was saying came out and voted the way they believed instead of making these calculations, things would be different. And that's true, but I've got the one vote here, and I've got to decide what to do, and I have data that tells me what is likely to be happening. In order for it to come out the opposite direction, well, you're right. If everybody who did feel that way decided to vote that way, the outcome could be different. But we find ourselves having one day to do it. Is everybody going to switch, or what's the signal here that guarantees me that everybody's going to go and do this? So I don't know.
Right, and it's not only the one day in the primary. You have to make your vote in the primary based on what you think is going to happen in the general election. If everybody who liked Bernie voted for Bernie in the primary, then Bernie could win the primary. That would be great if he's going to do well in the general. And that's really, that's really where it comes down to. Now, the other sort of flip side is, let's say we're at a point, or at least I'm at a point, where Hillary is clearly crushing Bernie in the general, in the primaries. That might make me more likely to vote for Bernie, because then I know, all right, he's not going to win. Not that, again, you could say, well, my one vote's not going to matter, but my one vote could matter. So if it's not close anymore, then I want to show a strong showing for the progressive wing of the party. So there's another sort of flip there. I don't mind giving my vote to somebody who might not do so well in the general if they're not going to get to the general. But I want to make sure that the progressive wing isn't embarrassed. So the polling matters a lot. Look, the issues matter a lot, and in some ways, electability it can be unfair that electability can crowd out the issues. But that's the reality of what we're doing here. We're not voting for president when we vote in the Democratic primary. We're voting for a nominee who will best represent our values and our party. It's a different kind of vote than the vote for president in November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know this is enormously frustrating, particularly to Bernie Sanders supporters. I mean, this is the fight that you have to fight for any underdog candidate, and I will say this: I've seen it before, and that's also infuriating to people who think that Bernie Sanders is somehow unique. And there are many ways in which he is unique, but it's certainly it's something that plays itself out if not every 4 years or every 8, if you're talking about an open seat in the White House, then certainly very frequently. We always run into this, and it's always the case that if people only, or if progressives came out in the numbers that they say they exist in, and then the outcome would be different. But, there's a lot of people who have pragmatic approaches to things that, you're not going to talk them out of it as hard as you try. And I guess some people will, every once in a while come around and say, well, this time I'm going to vote ideologically. But like I said, there's no bat signal for everybody to do it all at once. And it's very unlikely to come out the way you wish it would. I don't know.
Right.
To me, as much as I like Bernie Sanders, and I've worked on Bernie Sanders campaigns in the past, there's no doubt that I think that he would do a very different job in approaching a lot of, and maybe the bulk of issues, than the way I think Hillary Clinton would approach them. But I don't know, even as president, I'm not certain that he's able to get it done in the same. I don't know that Hillary Clinton is able to get what she wants done either, but with much more moderate goals, I think the odds are better. But as powerful as the position of the presidency is, there are certain limitations, including the pool of nominees from which you are likely to draw the personnel, the lineup of your administration. And I don't know that there isn't more overlap given who is prominent enough to be nominated and respected enough to be confirmed. I don't know that, when you're talking about thousands and thousands of people, that you're really talking about a very different pool as between the two of them. But I could be wrong about that.
Well, and the other thing is that it's a different environment in terms of the legislation you can pass when you don't know as much as anything can be known in politics. But we pretty much know that the Democrats are not going to retake the House. So
yes, there's
no way that Bernie is going to be able to pass Bernie's legislation, or that Hillary is going to be able to pass Hillary's legislation in terms of a kind of a wish list. We saw how difficult it was even for President Obama in 2009 and 10 to get things through. So, I mean, it's a given, but it's worth saying. I'm curious what you think to take us in a slightly different direction. Who's a Democratic nominee for vice president? I mean, who are the people in your mind who are out there and who are likely to be selected, whether it's Bernie or Hillary at the ticket, or Biden.
That's a good question because
it's
not one of the three top candidates do I think would accept the job or be comfortable in the job.
No. Bernie is not going to be somebody's vice president. Biden is not going to be somebody's vice president. Neither is.
No. So where? I imagine. Well, I don't know. Let's say the usual players. You're talking about senators and governors.
Right.
But, I mean, all-stars among them. Obvious choices? No.
Right. Right. I mean, everybody would be excited about Elizabeth Warren. I don't know that she's interested in moving out of the Senate to be somebody's vice president at age 67.
Yeah. Julian Castro.
Well, that's one I'm thinking. I mean, granted, he hasn't run a statewide campaign, but he was mayor of San Antonio. There are a lot more people in San Antonio than there were in Alaska.
This is true.
And he's run HUD, Housing and Urban Development, for the last 2 years, and he's got another year and a half. He would be experienced at the federal level. He would have executive experience, as some people like to emphasize. Running a big city. He wouldn't necessarily flip Texas, but he would be a good choice, I think, in terms of getting motivated Hispanic Americans. Be a major barrier broken to have Hispanic American on the top of the ticket. Yeah. Youth to balance age, and whether it's Hillary or Bernie or Biden, there's a lot of age there.
True.
He's an interesting choice. I mean, I think Sherrod Brown is an interesting choice just because if you could lock down Ohio.
Yes.
Again, now sort of gaming this out, I'm pretty sure the Republicans are going first. They've got their hootenanny in July. If they pick Kasich as a vice president, especially a Bush Kasich or a Rubio Kasich ticket that has the chance to lock down Florida and Ohio, would scare me a little bit. There you might go to Sherrod Brown to neutralize Kasich in Ohio. But I don't know. I don't think Sherrod Brown does much. You know what? He's a strong progressive voice. So who knows? But once you get past Castro and Brown, assuming Warren is uninterested, it's hard for me to come up with anybody else. It is odd that there are no statewide office holders, whether you're talking about governors or senators, from in the Democratic Party who I can think of who are either who are Hispanic, which is an important community. Gary Locke was a governor, I don't know, a million years ago. I don't think he's much of a political draw. You have Deval Patrick, who was the governor of Massachusetts. He's an interesting draw. Although I think if you want to look at it purely in terms of pure strategy, I don't know how much, but maybe Deval Patrick could get people out to vote. Again, I think probably Brown and Castro are the two I'm coming up with, and Brown really only makes sense to block the attraction of a Kasich.
Yeah,
Kasich is an interesting guy. He's really, this is probably just overanalyzing it, but he's moving up. Yeah, he's making it interesting.
By the way, you get a thumbs up from Arliss Bunny on Sherrod Brown, who's out there listening in, and definitely a popular choice. Sherrod Brown would be a great nod to the. I don't know how well they would take it, but a great nod, I think, to the Sanders supporters should their man not win the nomination. I mean, he comes from not exactly the same place, but certainly the same wing of, well, I guess Bernie doesn't really occupy a wing of the Democratic Party. He's running for the Democratic nomination, yes, but that could be a helpful area of rapprochement, plus bring Ohio, back into the column. It's a good thought. So
yeah, I mean, to some degree, it's a state is overrated,
yeah.
but Kasich is the sitting governor,
yes.
And he's very popular. And writing off Ohio and Florida, yikes. And I think we could compete in Florida even against Jeb or Rubio, but that's a little scary. But the most important thing, frankly, I think, if I can go back to my own piece, is the point that these are good candidates and Democrats need to get behind them, and Democrats will get behind them. I'm not worried about that. If they can overcome and patch up the Obama-Hillary tension from 2008, then I'm not worried. And that comes from the top. I don't think Bernie would do anything less than fully support a Hillary nomination, and I don't think, and I know Hillary would do the same thing for Bernie and Biden for all three, for the other two. I'm not worried about that. We do see these. We're playing a little inside baseball, but presumably most of our listeners are Daily Kos readers. We see some fights, in some comment sections, but you know what? I'm not too worried about those. Comment sections are where people, can blow off steam. People are going to come around. It's going to be 100 years before we won't have to just say Ralph Nader anyone, and I'm not going to worry. I'm just not going to worry. I think that we, as liberals and as progressives, and even as those among us who might be socialists, we know what we need to do when it comes to the day of the general election.
Yes, I think you're right, and I think Sanders is right there with you. I mean, the clearest signal I think he could have given was the decision, which he had to make, to run as a Democrat. He could easily have run as an independent. That's where he stands now, and he was pretty clear about why he did it too. Didn't want to do the Ralph Nader thing. So,
right,
I have no doubt.
He's run a very classy campaign so far. He hasn't once taken any kind of bait to attack Hillary. I think there was an exchange yesterday where he criticized a reporter who said, "Look, I'm just not going to take that bait. I'm not going to attack Hillary. We disagree on certain things." I think he said something. He's talked about TPP, talked about a $15 minimum wage, and he said, Hillary's not there with me, but I like her, I respect her. I mean, that's classy, but also smart, and it's giving an example to his supporters that that's how they should proceed, and I think they will.
I think so too. All right, well, we're now playing our outro music, and so out of time. But thanks again for coming by, Ian, and for holding on after our technical difficulties on Tuesday. Thanks so much for spending the hour with us.
My pleasure, and it was worth the wait.
Thanks so much. All right, Ian Reifowitz, everyone, a featured writer. Are you now featured, or are we calling you something different? I
believe I'm a contributing editor.
Contributing editor. It's now so hard to keep track of our structure. Contributing editor, Ian Reifowitz. Thanks. That's what I am, too, and I should keep track of those things.
Very important.
Take care, Ian, and we hope to speak with you again soon. Thanks for coming by. After show coming up next on netrootsradio.com. I've eaten up all the time I usually spend telling you what's next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for Ian for hanging on. By the way, Arliss Bunny was hanging out in the background, hoping to perhaps get a little bit of airtime to talk a little bit about Hillary and the election and what we were discussing. But guess what? She's coming up next on the last half of today's after show. So hang on next. You'll hear from her as well.